Victims of the revolution. The fortune bargain between humans and cranes was not the only deal our species made. Another deal was struck concerning the fate of animals such as sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens. Nomadic bands that stalked wild sheep gradually altered the constitution of the herds on which they preyed. This process probably began with selective hunting. Humans learned that it was to their advantage to hunt only adult rams and old or sick sheep. They spare fertile females and young lambs in order to safeguard the long-term vitality of the local herd. The second step may have been to actively defend the herd against predators, driving away lions, wolves, and rival human bands. The band might next have corralled the herd into a narrow gorge in order to better control and defend it. Finally, people began to make a more careful selection among the sheep in order to tailor them to human needs. The most aggressive rams, those that showed the greatest resistance to human control, were slaughtered first. So were the skinniest and most inquisitive females. Shepherds are not fond of sheep, whose curiosity takes them far away from the herd. With each passing generation, the sheep became fatter, more submissive, and less curious. Violent. Mary had a little lamb, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. Alternatively, hunters may have caught and adopted a lamb, fattening it during the months of plenty, and slaughtering it in the leaner season. At some stage, they began keeping a greater number of such lambs. Some of these reached puberty and began to procreate. The most aggressive and unruly lambs were first to the slaughter. The most submissive, most appealing lambs were allowed to live longer and procreate. The result was a herd of domesticated and submissive sheep. Such domesticated animals, sheep, chickens, donkeys, and others, supplied food, meat, milk, eggs, raw materials such as skins, wool, muscle power, transportation, fluffing, grinding, and other tasks hitherto performed by human sinew were increasingly carried out by animals. In most farming societies, people focused on plant cultivation. Raising animals was a secondary activity, but a new kind of society also appeared in some places, based primarily on the exploitation of animals, traps, pastoralist headers. As humans spread around the world, so did their domesticated animals. 10,000 years ago, not more than a few million sheep, cattle, goats, bulls, and chickens lived in restricted Afro-Asian niches. Today, the world contains about a billion sheep, a billion pigs, more than a billion cattle, and more than 25 billion chickens, and they are all over the globe. The domesticated chicken is the most widespread fowl ever. Following Homo sapiens, domesticated cattle, pigs, and sheep are the second, third, and fourth most widespread large mammals in the world. From a narrow evolutionary perspective, which measures success by the number of DNA copies, the agricultural revolution was a wonderful boon for chickens, cattle, pigs, and sheep. Unfortunately, the evolutionary perspective is an incomplete measure of success. It judges everything by the criteria of survival and reproduction, with no regard for individual suffering and happiness. Domesticated chickens and cattle may well be an evolutionary success story, but they are also among the most miserable creatures that ever lived. The domestication of animals was founded on a series of brutal practices that only became crueler with the passing of the centuries. The natural lifespan of wild chickens is about 7 to 12 years, and of cattle about 20 to 25 years. In the wild, most chickens and cattle died long before that, but they still had a fair chance of living for a respectable numbers of years. In contrast, the vast majority of domesticated chickens and cattle were slaughtered at the age of between a few weeks and a few months, because this has always been the optimal slaughtering age from an economic perspective. Why keep feeding a cock for 3 years if it has already reached its maximum weight after 3 months? Egg-laying hens, dairy cows, and draught animals are sometimes allowed to live for many years, but the price is subjugation to a way of life completely alien to their urges and their desires. It is reasonable to assume, for example, that bulls prefer to spend their days wandering over open prairies in the company of other bulls and cows rather than pulling carts and plowshares under the yoke of wielding ape. In order to turn bulls, horses, donkeys, and camels into obedient trot animals, their natural instincts and social ties had to be broken, their aggression and sexuality contained, and their freedom of movement curtailed. Farmers developed techniques such as locking animals inside pens, cages, bridling them in harnesses and lashes, training them with whips and cattle prods, and mutilating them. The process of taming almost always involves the castration of males. This restrains male aggression and enables humans selectively to control the herd's procreation. In many new unit societies, the wealth of a person has traditionally been determined by the numbers of pigs he or she owns. To ensure that the pigs can run away, farmers in northern New Guinea slice off a chunk of its pig's nose. This causes severe pain whenever the pig tries to sniff. Since the pigs cannot find food or even find their ways around without sniffing, this mutilation makes them completely dependent on their human owners. In another area of New Guinea, it has been customary to gouge out pigs' eyes so that they cannot even see when they are going. The dairy industry has its own ways of forcing animals to do its will. Cows, goats, sheep produce milk only after giving birth to calves, kids, and lambs, and only as long as the youngsters are suckling. To continue the supply of animals' milk, a farmer needs to have calves, kids, and lambs for suckling, but must prevent them from monopolizing the milk. One common method throughout history was to simply slaughter the calf and kids shortly after birth, milk the mother and for all she was, and then get her pregnant again. This is still a very widespread technique. In many modern dairy farms, a milk cow usually lives for about 5 years before being slaughtered. During these 5 years, she is almost constantly pregnant and fertilized within 60 to 120 days after giving birth in order to preserve maximum milk production. Her calves are separated from her shortly after birth. The females are rare to become the next generation of dairy cows, whereas the males are handed over to the care of the meat industry. Another method is to keep the calves and kids near their mothers, but prevent them by various stratagems from suckling too much milk. The simplest way to do that is to allow the kids or calf to start suckling, but right away once the milk starts flowing. This method usually encounters resistance from both kid and mother. Some shepherd tribes to use kill the offspring, eat each flesh, and then stop the scheme. The stuffed offspring were then presented to the mother, so its presence would engage her milk production. The Nuer tribe in the Sudan went so far to smear stuffed animals with their mother's urine to give the counterfeit calf a familiar life scent. Another newer technique was to tie a ring of thorns around a calf's mouth so that it pricks the mother and causes her to resist suckling. Tuareg camel breeders in Sahara used to puncture or cover parts of the nose and upper lips of the young camels in order to make suckling painful, thereby discouraging them from consuming too much milk. Not all agricultural societies were this cruel to their farm animals. The lives of some domesticated animals could be quite good. Sheep raised for wool, pet dogs and cats, war horses and race horses often enjoyed comfortable conditions. The Roman Emperor Caligula urged planned to appoint his favorite horse in citadels to the cultured sheep. Shepherds and farmers throughout history show affection for their animals and have taken great care of them, just as many slaveholders felt affection and concern for their slaves. It was no accident that kings and prophets styled themselves as shepherds and likened the way they and the gods cared for their people to a shepherd has cared for his flock. Yes, from the viewpoint of the herd, rather than that of the shepherd, it's hard to avoid the impression that the vast majority of domesticated animals, the agricultural revolution was a terrible catastrophe. Their evolutionary success is meaningless. A rare wild rhinoceros on the brink of extinction is probably more satisfying than a calf who spends its short life inside a tiny box, fattened to produce juicy steaks. The contented rhinoceros is no less content for being among the last of its kind. The numerical success of the calf species is little consolation for the suffering the individual endures. This discrepancy between evolution success and individual sufferings is perhaps the most important lessons we can draw from agricultural revolution. When we study the narrative of plants such as wheat and maize, maybe the purely evolutionary perspective makes sense. Yet, in the case of animals such as cattle, sheep, and sapiens, each with a complex world of sensations and emotions, we have to consider how evolutionary success translates into individual experience. In the following chapters, we will see time and again how a dramatic increase in the collective power and ostensible success of our species went hand in hand with much individual suffering.